Здравствуйте. Спасибо, что нашли время на интервью. Как у вас дела?
Well, thank you for finding the time for this interview. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Мне тоже. Спасибо, что пришли.
That's mutual. Thank you for coming here for this interview.
Что побудило вас заняться журналистикой, особенно в контексте международной политики и конфликтов?
What motivated you to start working as a journalist, especially in the context of international politics and conflict?
I grew up in a very political family, and our dinner table conversations were always political or religious. So for me, it was something that came from childhood. So I got interested in journalism after seeing some great journalists and the heroic work that they did, exposing the crimes of the United States government, telling the truth when others didn't want to say it or were afraid to say it. And so I wanted to follow also in their footsteps as an independent investigative journalist.
Вы часто освещаете события в странах, находящихся в состоянии войны или политического кризиса. Как вы справляетесь с эмоциональной нагрузкой?
Christopher, it is often that you cover events in countries that are in a state of war or in some political crisis. How do you deal with the emotional stress?
Of course, the emotional toll that journalists face, as well as civilians and military personnel, is something very serious and something that one has to prepare themselves physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually for. With that understanding, we go to these areas of conflict and war and devastation with a mission that is of a higher value, of a higher virtue, of a higher moral and ethical code. And so that helps to protect us and insulate us in seeing what we see and being able to tell the truth to the world audience while processing all of the images, the destruction, the devastation that we witness. So in a way, we are like missionaries. We are doing the work, we're getting information and knowledge, and then we're bringing it to another group of people who don't have access to that information. And it's a very important, it's a very sacred role, and it's a role that we take very seriously because we are the conduit, we are the bridge for people to understand what's happening. And in that way, sometimes we must take care of our emotional state and try to stay calm and cool and level-headed and maybe meditate a lot in order to be able to do our jobs effectively and to bring the information immediately.
Какие события или интервью оказали на вас наибольшее влияние как на журналиста и как на человека?
What events or what interviews have had the greatest influence, the greatest impact on you as a journalist and as a person?
I think some of the most important and impactful interviews have been when I interviewed Hamas's leadership in Qatar, when I was in Yemen, interviewing people who had suffered under the bombardment of the United States and Saudi Arabia and the coalition, and also when I was in the Donbass and was witness to all of the atrocities and devastation in Lugansk, in Donetsk, in Mariupol. So those three, really, I would say, were some of the most important and valuable to me as a journalist. I would, of course, say that the most famous investigative piece I did was the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein's second Black Book, which I discovered, which was a major investigative feat in the US and became international news. So that was, of course, I think my most proud moment is my discovery of that. But the most impactful were the three that I spoke about because of their human element and because they are tied to some of the greatest centers of conflict and war in our time.
И как вы оцениваете роль независимой журналистики в эпоху цифровых медиа и цензуры?
How do you evaluate the role of independent journalism in the era of digital media and censorship?
The role of independent journalists now in the era of social media and censorship is so critical. It's one of the most critical elements. And I think it's the only true journalism that exists today because the major journalistic outlets in the West are spewing the lies and the propaganda. And on the other side, the algorithm is suppressing a lot of the information that needs to get out. So independent journalists like you, like myself, and many others, we have been able to bring the truth to so many people using alternative means that would not have been available before. And that's been the most impactful now.
Вы открыто выражаете антипатические взгляды. С какими трудностями вы сталкивались со своей политической позицией?
You openly express anti-imperialistic views. Any difficulties that you face because of your political position?
Of course, for my views, being an anti-imperialist, we've faced severe repression in the United States, monitoring and surveilling by the FBI. I had an FBI raid on my grandfather's house when I was living with him. I also had stops and detentions at every border that I crossed in the US, and also in Europe. I had similar issues as well. So we faced tremendous repression for what we believe, electronics confiscated, money confiscated, many of our personal belongings photographed and put into databases. And this is the invasion of privacy and the surveillance that comes as a result of our beliefs.
Как вы выбираете темы и регионы для своих репортажей? Что определяет ваш интерес?
How do you choose topics and how do you choose regions for your reports? What determines your interest?
I think my interest is determined, number one, by areas where I focused my studies. So, for example, North Africa, Middle East, Russia, and Eastern Europe, Central Asia. These are areas that I've spent a lot of time studying. And also, I'm interested in areas where the US is actively involved in trying to commit crimes, trying to conduct regime change or some sort of color revolution. For example, I'm interested in what's going on in Venezuela, what's going on in other countries around the world. And I think that it's very important to understand that where the US is trying to destroy that country, independent journalists should be there to tell the truth against the mainstream propaganda that is always drumming up support for war.
Какие ошибки, по вашему мнению, чаще всего допускают западные СМИ при освещении международных конфликтов?
What mistakes do you think the Western media make most often when they cover international conflicts?
The thing that they make the mistakes most is who's the aggressor, who's the oppressor, who's the one that initiated the conflict. They always push the blame to the other party when the blame rests squarely in the United States' hands and in the Western hands. So, for example, they blame Russia for the aggression when it was the West that started that aggression. They blame Palestinians for aggression when it was Israel, for example, that started the aggression. They blame, different countries. They blame Iran for aggression when it was the US and its allies that supported aggression in the region. So in all of this, you look to who the US says is the aggressor, and more often than not, it's the opposite.
И как вы относитесь к обвинениям в пропаганде, которые иногда звучат в адрес независимых журналистов?
What do you think about the accusations of propaganda that are often made against independent journalists?
Of course, it's the easiest way to discredit independent journalists, to say that they are somehow propaganda or mouthpieces of the Kremlin or Iranian or Qatari or Chinese media and governments. But that's not true. Independent journalists simply tell the truth on the ground. And that truth in the West is usually the opposite of what the mainstream is saying. So therefore, in order to discredit it and to lessen its impact, they say, oh, it's propaganda, this is fake news, this is misinformation, disinformation, and they use that type of language. But that couldn't be further from the truth.
Какие советы вы бы дали молодым журналистам, стремящимся к объективности в условиях политического давления?
Any advice that you could give to young journalists who strive for objectivity in the face of political pressure?
I think that young people have to understand that everything comes with a risk and a sacrifice. And if they want to speak truth to power, if they want to speak the truth about what's going on the ground, they have to be prepared to suffer the consequences for that. But they have to understand that their work is not only essential, it is existential, it's necessary for our survival. And so they need to understand that their work is critical, necessary, and something that has to be done. And so it becomes a moral duty, a moral imperative to be that young journalist risking everything to tell the truth to everyone.
Окей, какие проекты или темы вы планируете исследовать в ближайшем будущем?
What projects or what subjects do you plan to explore in the nearest future?
Of course, I'm still very much interested in what's going on in the Donbass and coming back there, doing some more reporting, trying to get more information, speaking more about what's happening there and what's happened since 2014, learning more of the stories. I'm also very interested in what's going on in Yemen still, what's going on in Palestine, and more generally, in all the places that are resisting US imperialism. So that's where I think my journalism will take me. And I look forward to continuing this type of investigative reporting and telling the truth to the American people, to the Western people, to the world.
Будем ждать еще новые репортажи.
Well, we'll be looking forward to your new report.
Окей.
Yes, of course. And I look forward to seeing you, hopefully soon, again, in Donbass.
А у нас надеется на Донбассе тебя увидеть очень скоро.
Было бы здорово, это красота.
That would be awesome. Welcome
Absolutely.
back.
Thank you very much.
Да, обязательно.
Изначально освободила отправиться в Донбасс, учитывая сложную обстановку в регионе.
But initially, what motivated you to go to Donbass given the difficulty of the situation there in that region?
So I've supported the resistance in the Donbass since the first days because we had many friends who were communists, anti-imperialists in Ukraine. Some who were in the trade union building in Odessa, who continued to resist and continued to struggle. And so with that understanding, we were in solidarity with Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic, with Crimea, and with the anti-fascist, anti-imperialist resistance. So I've been with you since 2014, and I will continue to be with you until the end.
А что оказало наибольшее впечатление из всего виденного там?
What was the brightest impression? What made the most impression on you from what you have seen there?
The biggest impression for me was the determination and the sacrifice of the people to struggle for their self-determination, to resist against not only Ukraine, but against the entire collective West. And they resisted heroically. So the heroism, the dignity, the sacrifice of the people of the Donbass was something that continues to impress me today. I hope I can be just a fraction of how heroic that those people were to survive, to thrive, and to continue to struggle for their liberation. It really is unbelievable in these days.
Спасибо большое за такие прекрасные слова и в целом беседу. Была рада очень пообщаться.
Thank you so much for this beautiful, really beautiful words, and generally for this conversation. That's a pleasure to talk to you.
It's my pleasure, really my pleasure. Спасибо большое, really.